materially to the weight, while it gave leather-like toughness provided the necessary combination of lightness and strength. When metal was used, it was generally an alloy, two white-colored metals and one red one entering into its composition. The resultant was white-colored, like aluminum, and even lighter in weight. Over the rough framework of the airboat was extended a large sheet of this metal, which was then beaten into shape and electrically welded where necessary. But whether built of metal or wood, their outside surface was apparently seamless and perfectly smooth, and they shone in the dark as if coated with luminous paint. In shape, they were boat-like, but they were invariably decked over, for when at full speed, it could not have been convenient, even if safe, for anyone on board to remain on the upper deck. Their propelling and steering gear could be brought into use at either end. But the all-interesting question is that relating to the power by which they were propelled, in the earlier times it seems to have been personal vril that supplied the motive power, whether used in conjunction with any mechanical contrivance or not matters little. Vril is the personal power which Bulwer Lytton described fairly accurately in his Coming Race, and which the colleges for the higher training of the youth of Atlantis were specially occupied in developing. But in later days, the airboats were operated by a force which was generated in what is to us an unknown manner and was employed with definite mechanical arrangements. This force, though not yet discovered by science, more nearly approached the perfect motor than the electric power used by Maxim. It was in fact of an etheric nature, but though we are no nearer to the solution of the problem, its method of arrangement can be described. The mechanical arrangements no doubt differed in different vessels. The following description is taken from an airboat in which, on one occasion, 3 ambassadors from the king who ruled over the northern part of Poseidonus made the journey to the court of the southern kingdom. A strong heavy metal chest which lay in the center of the boat was the generator. Thence the force flowed through 2 large flexible tubes to either end of the vessel, as well as through 8 subsidiary tubes fixed fore and aft to the bulwarks. These had double openings pointing vertically. When the journey was about to begin, the valves of the 8 bulwark tubes which pointed downward were opened. All the other tubes being closed, the current rushing through these impinged on the earth with such force as to drive the boat upward, while the air itself continued to supply the necessary fulcrum. The current rushing through these impinged on the earth with such force as to drive the boat upward, while the air itself continued to supply the necessary fulcrum. When a sufficient elevation was reached, the flexible tube at the end of the vessel which pointed away from the desired destination was brought into action, while by the partial closing of the valves the current rushing through the 8 vertical tubes was reduced to small amount required to maintain the elevation reached. The great volume of the current being now directed through the large tube pointing downward from the stern at an angle of about 45 degrees, while helping to maintain the elevation provided also the great motive power to propel the vessel through the air. The steering was accomplished by the discharge of the current through this tube, for the slightest change in its direction at once caused an alteration in the vessel's course. But constant supervision was not required. When a long journey had to be taken, the tube could be fixed so as to need no handling till the destination was almost reached. The maximum speed attained was about 100 miles an hour, but always in the form of a long wave, now approaching, now receding from the earth. The elevation at which the vessel traveled was only a few hundred feet. Indeed, when high mountains lay in the line of their track, it was necessary to change their course and go around them. The more rarefied air no longer supplied the fulcrum. Hills about 1,000 feet were the highest they could cross. The means by which the vessel was brought to a stop on reaching its destination, and this could be done equally well in mid-air, was to give escape to some of the current force through the tube at that end, which pointed toward its destination, and the current impinged in the land of air in front and acted as a drag, while the propelling force behind was gradually reduced by the closing of the valve. The reason has still to be given for the existence of the 8 tubes pointing upward from the bulwarks. This had especially to do with aerial warfare. Having so powerful a force at their disposal, the warships naturally directed the current against each other. Now this was apt to destroy the equilibrium of the ship so struck and to turn it upside down, a situation sure to be taken advantage of by the enemy's vessel to make an attack with its ram. There also was the further danger of being precipitated to the ground unless the shutting and opening of the necessary valves were quickly attended to. In whatever position the vessel might be, the tubes pointing toward the earth were naturally those through which the current should be rushing, while the tubes pointing upward should be closed. The means whereby a vessel turned upside down might be righted and placed again on a level keel was accomplished by using the 4 tubes pointing downward at one side of the vessel only, while the 4 at the other side were kept closed. Marvelous things are being revealed of those dark times, the gloom of which was preceded by long sunlight eras of men's power and progress. A group of Englishmen, whose work has been summarized by Scott Elliott of London, pursued one series of investigation. Ignatius Donnelly carried on another, and both have located the antediluvian world at the bottom of the sea. Atlantis was the world before the flood, stretching far and wide over the space now flooded by the Atlantic Ocean. Ignatius Donnelly takes the testimony of the sea, of the flora and of the fauna, of history, legend and scientific revelation, and makes them his witness in his demonstrations of the erstwhile existence in the Atlantic Ocean, opposite the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, of a large island which was the remnant of an Atlantic continent, and known to the ancient world as Atlantis. He argues that the description of this land given by Plato is no fable, as has long been supposed, as was once supposed of Herculaneum and Pompeii, the fabulous cities, but like them, veritable history. The Atlantis was the region where man first rose from a state of barbarianism to civilization. Mr. Scott Elliott, however, after due regard paid historic, scientific, and literary evidences, pens faith and testimony to records from the occult which were compiled and handed down through the ages, and to maps that have been physically preserved through the inconceivably long centuries that have elapsed since the ancient good and evil days of Atlantis, and gives dates and accurate data which are open for investigation to the duly qualified. He treats of the origin and territorial location of the 7 subraces which successively peopled the vast antediluvian continent, the political institutions they respectively evolved, their immigrations to the other parts of the world, the arts and sciences they developed, the manners and customs they adopted, the rise and decline of religions. The subraces were the Romanal, the Tolvati, the Toltec, the first Turanian, the original Semite, the Akkadian, and lastly, the Mongolian. Of these, the Toltec developed the highest civilization and organized the most powerful empire, ruling the entire continent of Atlantis for thousands of years, in great material power and glory. Hundreds of thousands of years later, one of their remote family races ruled splendidly in Mexico and Peru. Long ages before their degenerate descendants were conquered by the fiercer tribes of the north. About 1 million years ago, after great wars, all the petty kingdoms were united in one great federation, with a recognized emperor at its head. The second of these emperors was an adept, And for thousands of years, the divine dynasty ruled not only of the kingdoms in which Atlantis was divided, but the islands on the west and the southern portion of the adjacent land to the east. These initiate rulers retain connection with the occult hierarchy which governs the world, acting in harmony with its plans. This was the golden age of the Toltec race. On the continents of North and South America, the race spread abroad and flourished, and thousands of years later established the empires of Mexico and Peru. The city of the Golden Gate was the home of these ancient emperors. It lay on the east coast of the continent, close to the sea, and about 15 degrees north of the equator. A beautiful wooded park-like country surrounded the city. Scattered over a large area of this were the villa residents of the wealthier classes. The city proper was built on the slopes of a hill which rose from the plain about 500 feet. On the summit lay the emperor's palaces and gardens, in whose center welled up from the earth a never-ending stretch of water, supplying first the palaces and the fountains in the gardens, thence flowing in the four directions and falling in cascades into a canal or moat which encompassed the palace grounds, and thus separated them from the city, which lay down on every side. From this canal, 4 channels led the water through the 4 quarters of the city to cascades, which in their turn supplied another encircling canal at a lower level. There were 3 such canals forming a concentric circle, the outermost and lowest of which was still about the level of the plain. A 4th canal, at this lowest level of rectangular design, received the constantly flowing waters, and in its turn discharged them into the sea. The city was thus divided into 3 great belts, each hemmed in by canals. In the upper belt, just below the palace grounds, was a circular race course and large public gardens. Most of the houses of the court officials lay on the belt, and here also was the stranger's home, a palace where all strangers who might come to the city were entertained.